Is our universe well ordered, or are things from our past being altered? Can the Mandela effect be chalked up to false memory, or is there something real about it? If the Mandela effect is really about false memory, then why do so many people remember a different version of things from the past in the same way? Do you remember the famous Forrest Gump line as life is like a box of chocolates? Most seem to remember it that way. How is it that when you now go back and watch the movie, Forrest Gump now says life was like a box of chocolates? Do you remember an alternate version of the Nelson Mandela story, where he was jailed and later died while he was imprisoned, as some do? Have biblical verses such as Isaiah 11:6 suddenly changed? Are land masses now disappearing off of maps for no apparent reason? Is there physical evidence for the Mandela effect, or is some of the purported evidence just mere coincidence or a fabrication? Does the Mandela effect fit into quantum theories such as string theory, or the belief by some scientists that there are several parallel universes? Can quantum computing be an explanation as to why our reality and the past seems to be changing all around us? And do these concepts help explain all the strange paranormal phenomena so many people experience? Are UFOs just time travelers or visitors from another dimension? Are ghosts really just beings from another dimension that are somehow bleeding into our reality? Prepare to have your mind blown as Rob Shelsky, author of the book Shattered Reality The Mandela Effect, joins us to talk about what he believes is proof for the Mandela effect and its relation to quantum physics and paranormal phenomena.
Well, hello out there, everybody, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and what a truly spectacular show I have in store for you tonight. So my guest is Rob Shelsky, and Rob is author of the book Shattered Reality The Mandela Effect. And prepare to have your mind blown. If you're like me and you've dismissed this topic in the past, I don't think you will anymore after hearing tonight's episode. There is so much evidence he's compiled in his book for the Mandela Effect. And not only just memories that people have, they remember things differently, but the strange thing is a lot of people remember them the same way. So how do you account for that? And he's also amassed a lot of physical evidence that he put together in his book. So it's going to be a great, great discussion. And I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. And if you haven't already, please head over to the Facebook page at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal. And you can also visit us on Twitter. We are at twitter.com/passion, the number 4, the para, P-A-R-A. You'll find us there on Twitter. And again, if you're an iTunes user, please offer a quick review of the show. Rate and review the show. It'll only take you a minute and help us to keep moving things forward. And we're also on Stitcher now, so you can also find the show on Stitcher. And we're still waiting approval on the iHeartRadio app. So hopefully we get approval on iHeartRadio and you'll be able to find us down the road there. Okay, so another thing I want to mention is make sure you hop over and visit the new website, the new improved website. It is at passion, the number 4, theparanormal.com. And we are now, Passion for the Paranormal is an Amazon affiliate. And so if you find books from past guests on the show that you want to purchase, please hop over there to that section of the website, and you can click on one of those links, and a very small part of that proceed will go to help benefit the Passion for the Paranormal show. So please do that. If you find any past materials, books that you like from previous guests, you'll find those links right there on the website. You can also blog about past episodes and catch up with past episodes right there on the website. So a lot of cool things you can do. Again, new and improved look to the website. I really think you'll like it, so stop over there and visit it. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into the discussion I had with Rob Shelsky truly amazing discussion. Once again, I think it's going to blow your mind. So I really hope you enjoy the show, and thanks for tuning in. Okay, so my guest today is Rob Shelsky, and Rob is a best-selling and award-nominated author and writes both fiction and non-fiction books to include topics on UFOs and the paranormal. He is also a former MUFON field investigator, and he is joining me today to talk about the Mandela Effect and the related theories to that based on his recent book, Shattered Reality, The Mandela Effect. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy being here.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I think when we talked a little bit before, I mentioned that this is kind of a topic that I easily kind of dismissed in the past. And I'd heard your show on I'd heard your interview on another show where you were talking about this, and quite frankly, it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's amazing, and kind of how this comes into play into other theories where you're talking about quantum physics and all that kind of stuff. But it's really kind of this esoteric kind of topic and can really blow your mind. And I think it's fascinating, and it's a topic that I'm almost ashamed to say I dismissed early on. But can you talk a little bit about what the Mandela Effect is and kind of how you got involved in researching it?
Sure, yeah. The Mandela Effect, the name for it was coined by Ms. Fiona Broome in 2013, and originally was to describe a particular phenomenon, and that was with regard to people's memories of the death and the life of Nelson Mandela, president of South Africa. Now, a lot of people remembered that he died in prison under the apartheid regime in South Africa back in the 1980s, late 1980s, and oddly enough, that was my memory. But he did go on to live, and he was released from prison, eventually became president of South Africa, and died at a nice old age. I also remember it that way, so I remember it both ways. Now, I put down my first memory to just being a mistake. You're not really paying a lot of attention. Time goes by, and you think, oh, no big deal. But it wasn't until I read this article that I realized that I had that memory too, and so did thousands of other people. And it turns out that people started reporting on it, and there's all sorts of Mandela effects with regard to memory. Now, the problem there is that psychiatrists and psychologists try to get rid of the Mandela effect. They contributed to confabulation, and that's the clinical term for memory defects. However, the problem is even they can't understand why so many people would have the same wrong memory from so many cultures and races and places around the earth and remember it wrong, but all remember it wrong the same way. And that's a real big deal because, yes, we can have false memories. They're real. I mean, we all have false memories. And so you don't pay a lot of attention to it. You think, oh, I remember it the other way. I must have had it mistaken. But when you all get it wrong the same way, that's extremely odd. And so even psychiatrists, psychologists can't say why that it should be that way. That's a big stumbling block. And I also find it difficult when scientists always try to come up with an excuse with no basis in fact. I mean, I have no problem if they say, oh, yes, we have researched this and come up with different ways of doing it. And therefore, we have come to this conclusion based on research and evidence we found. They don't bother. They just say, oh, I think it's just false memories.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating about this to me as well, is I've had conversations with other people about this topic, and one of them is about the people remembering the monocle with the Monopoly guy, and that's the way I remember it. I've talked to many people as well who remember it that way, yet you go back and look at the Monopoly games now, there's no monocle, so, I find that interesting.
Well, I remember with the monocle, too. And this goes on and on. I mean, the biggest example always seems to be the Berenstain Bears versus people remember it as being Berenstein Bears. I find that one awfully overused when there are just so many others. I mean, the list of false memories seems to go on. Is it Smokey the Bear? I mean, I was brought up saying Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires, says Smokey the Bear. Well, the National Forest Service says it never was Smokey the Bear. It was always Smokey Bear. That just sounds wrong to me.
I have to,
Smokey the Bear.
I have to agree with you.
It goes on and on and on in all ways, shapes, and forms. But I don't base my evidence for the Mandela effect strictly on memories because, again, psychologists are right in the sense that we do have false memories. If you remember something from your childhood, as you grow older, you remember that memory over and over and over again. So finally, what you're remembering is a memory of a memory of a memory. And false things will creep in. If you ask any two people what happened together when they were kids, say at the age of 9, and they'll each have a different version of that same event. So that's understandable, false memories. But there seems to be a lot of physical evidence for the Mandela effect as well.
Right, and it's funny you mentioned the Smokey the Bear thing because that's the way I remember it as well. I don't ever remember it just Smokey Bear, and so that
and there are so many others. I mean, Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. No, apparently it's now life was like a box of chocolates, which bothers me because why would Forrest Gump say life was like a box of chocolates?
Right.
Is it that way anymore? It just doesn't seem to make sense. Or Darth Vader saying, no, I am your father, when everyone, including Orway Jones, who actually spoke the part for Darth Vader, remember as being Luke, I am your father. I mean, this goes on and on. There's so many things. Kit Kat, with or without a hyphen in it. I remember Kit Kat with a hyphen.
And that's the way that's the way I remember it as well.
Yeah. And so as far as the memory things go, but again, the incredible part of this is when we get it wrong, we're all getting it wrong the same way. And that's what is really strange. One of my favorite examples personally is the color chartreuse. And I always ask my host what color they think chartreuse is. What color do you think chartreuse is?
I seem to remember it as like a pinkish reddish kind of color. That's the way I remember it.
I'm sorry to laugh, but everyone says that. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people say it, including one of my best friends. No, it is a bright lime green color, chartreuse. And but when people get it wrong, they always remember it being a reddish purple, a pinkish purple, a maroon color. They don't say orange, they don't say blue, they don't say yellow, they don't say mauve, they say like a magenta or a maroon or a reddish purple or a pinkish kind of blue color. But for some reason, they all say it wrong. And, you're describing it sort of the way you remember it, but you're all in the same category. You're at the wrong end of the color scale. But the thing is, you're all in the same place. Why aren't you all over the map with blue and yellow and everything else orange?
Right.
But no, you all remember it wrongly because the color is supposed to be lime green. And by the way, that's the way I remember it. So apparently you and I must be from different parallel universes.
I knew this conversation was going to make my head hurt. But one of the...
That's what says. It does start to really mess with your mind because it starts to scare you about reality. And that is where I did start with the Mandela effect, with false memories. But then I quickly began to look for physical evidence because I'm kind of a kick-the-tires kind of guy. I want to know. And I have come up with quite a bit of hard evidence on the Mandela effect. And it's pretty much irrefutable that something weird is going on, definitely.
Yeah, and another example I found, I did a little bit of research on the internet, just to read up on this because it's been a while since I've really, looked at this. And there was another interesting example in there, and it's from a movie I love, which is The Matrix. And the line in there that says that Morpheus never spoke was, "What if I told you everything you know is a lie?" And I do remember the line, "You've been living in a dream world, Neo." But the other line, as I went back and thought back about it, I'm like, maybe he didn't really say that. But when I first heard it, I thought, wow, I thought for sure he said that in the movie. But as I went and thought back about it, I do remember the second line I just quoted, but the first one I'm not sure about.
Actually, I'm not particularly familiar with that one either. I've seen the movie, and I do remember, or I personally remember him saying, what if I told you that everything you know and see is a lie, or words to that effect. So that's the way I remember it. But there's other movies the same way. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the James Bond movies, but one of them, and I think it was the one where they go to the moon with the space shuttle. So I'm trying to think of the name, Moonraker. And in that movie, there's a funny, evil blonde girl, and it's a big, mean guy, and he has all these metal teeth. And when he smiles, you see them. He's huge.
Right.
And in one scene, the way I remember it, he's falling in love with this little blonde Heidi-like girl, and he looks at her, and of course he's uncertain because when he reveals his teeth, he's afraid she won't like him. And he smiles hesitantly at her, showing all these metal teeth. And then she smiles back, showing the fact that she has braces on with all this metalwork. Now, in the movie now, she doesn't. It makes you wonder why there was even that scene with him deliberately smiling to show his teeth to her if she didn't have the same problem too, in a way. And it doesn't even make sense now, but no, she doesn't have any metalwork on her teeth. Very strange, but this runs through movies like you wouldn't believe. It runs through television shows. And again, the problem with all that is it's based on our memories. Do we remember it correctly, or are we remembering it the way we think it should be? And so it could, I can't argue that any particular instance of the Mandela effect from memories is valid, because how do you prove a false memory?
Right.
And even the fact that all of us seem to get it wrong the same way, which is kind of strange in itself, let's face it, you still can't prove that. But I can prove that other things have changed physically. Islands have been disappearing for quite a while now. And maps on globes have changed. Regular maps have changed. I personally discovered images of a globe from a TV show where the globe shows land masses that now no longer exist. A legitimate globe. Other people have discovered it in other movies. Dazed and Confused shows the land mass to the west of Australia. It's not there, yet it's clearly on the globe. The movie was filmed in a real school room. They used a real school globe. They're not cheap. They're quite expensive. And here they're spinning this globe, and while they're talking, it's spinning behind them, and you see this big landmass, sort of a horizontal-shaped one, spin by just west of Australia, about 1/5 the size of Australia. And actually, some people do remember landmass being there. They just don't remember the name of it. But also in a show of Friends, the series Friends, second season, there is a globe in the background in the living area where they're talking. And on the globe, you see an island to the southwest of Australia. Now, it's a different shape, and it's not as big as the one in Dazed and Confused, but it's definitely there, and it's not Tasmania, because that shows as well. Now, there is no island there. And then, seeing all this, I started doing research, really getting some old series to check. And in an old episode of I Dream of Jeannie, I don't know if you remember that show or not.
Yes, I do.
60s. Does that ring a bell to you at all?
I remember the show. I never, it's kind of, my memory of it is kind of vague.
Right. It's about an astronaut who finds a genie in a bottle, and she grants all his wishes, kind of thing. And it's a television series. It was fun.
Right.
Well, in one episode, he and another astronaut are talking, and in the background there's a globe. And if you look on the globe, there's a large landmass in the Pacific Ocean just to the west of Central America. And it's like bifurcated. It's got like a straight running through it. And again, it's sort of a horizontal-shaped landmass. Now, no such landmass exists. Now, in another scene, they show the globe again at a different angle, and it shows a large island off the southwest tip of South America, a large one, complete with the mountain ranges. It's quite clear. And rivers and a harbor. It doesn't exist. And it also shows, oddly enough, a landmass to the west of Australia, which isn't there. But why are globes from the 60s, 70s, 90s, and early 2000s in various TV shows and movies depicting globes of Earth that have landmasses that don't exist in our reality?
That's interesting, because I just thought of an example, and call me crazy if you will. I always remember there being an actual landmass in Antarctica depicted on a map, and whenever I see globes now, I never see that on there. Am I crazy, or is that another possible example?
Well, Antarctica is a landmass. It's covered by ice, but it is a landmass.
Right, but as I look at globes now, the last few I've looked at, I don't remember seeing them depicting a landmass. Now, if you look at Antarctica,
yeah, it's by an ice cap, which, by the way, is another interesting one. How many ice caps do we have on Earth? Do you know?
oh, I have no idea.
I hate to put you on the spot, but I grew up believing there were two ice caps, one at the South Pole, one at the North Pole. And globes always showed that. Maps always showed an ice cap at the North Pole and an ice cap at the South Pole.
Right.
We don't have an ice cap at the North Pole. I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but all of a sudden, Earth only has one ice cap.
Well,
and yet I clearly remember over and over seeing globes and maps when I was growing up in school, high school, college, university. Globes showed a northern ice cap as well as a southern one. Now we only have the one at the South Pole.
and it's funny that what you just mentioned is exactly really what I was talking about. I said Antarctica, but really what I was talking about was the North Pole and that landmass.
Okay, well then you're remembering it exactly as I remember it, and many, many, many other people. Now, if it was just 3 or 4 of us, we could be discounted. But we're talking thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, even millions of people who are getting it wrong the same way. Now, how do we account for this? How do we account for odd things we have found in like a finger watch, like a little tiny Swiss watch? Even says Swiss on the back of it and has a dial on it, on a 400-year-old Ming Dynasty tomb in China that had never been opened before. And here's this age-encrusted, sand-encrusted watch that fit on a ring, like a finger watch. And yet it couldn't possibly, because during the time of the Ming Dynasty, there was no such thing as that kind of a watch. In fact, watches in general didn't exist at all. Clocks are big, clunky, and expensive. And there were few and far between for that reason. And there certainly was nothing in the way of a wristwatch even. So how do we account for that? There was a coin they found recently in Mexico. And they dug it up from a construction site. And it's very faded, but it's still clear enough to read pretty well. And on it is a giant swastika, and it says Nueva Alemania, which literally means New Germany. And the date on that coin is 2039.
Wow.
Now, there was no Nueva Alemania. There was no New Germany. They never conquered Mexico in the West. I mean, that's like something out of a science fiction movie. So where did this 2039 coin come from? I mean, from the future into the past, and lay there on the ground and slowly aged till we dug it up in our own time? How do we account for these physical changes that we're seeing? And it's not just those. There are many, many more.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. And that kind of steals my thunder a little bit because, I was kind of thinking, just for the sake of playing devil's advocate here, I would say a lot of the times when you read about the Mandela Effect, a lot of them are about, more in entertainment, shows and that sort of thing. And so, I guess
it's always about memories rather than the rest of this stuff too. Yeah.
Right, and this is fascinating though. And then you start talking about the land masses and the North Pole, and that was one that popped into my head just a couple of days ago when I happened to be thinking about this. And I said Antarctica, but I actually what I was talking about is just what you were talking about as well, and that's the North Pole. And every globe I look at now does not show up there. So. Wow, this is some weird stuff. I mean,
it's really kind of creepy. I mean, you begin to think of reality as just standing on shifting sand, and then you start to think, well, what is real? And that's a scary assumption. I mean, one of the things people seem to overlook, excuse me, is that when you have missing islands and these land masses, if they once really were there and they're gone now, and we don't even remember them, what about all the people on them? I mean, if you had a big landmass to the west of Australia, it had to have been populated. There were people around the world who probably had relatives there, friends there, cousins, mothers, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers, and now they don't even remember them, or only vaguely have a memory of the place, but no details. And this landmass is gone. So not only has the island disappeared from our reality, but so have the people that were on it. And they may have been people that we loved and cared about, and now we have no memory. I mean, it's bad enough if someone dies and you grieve for someone you loved. At least you had the love and lost it. Better to have loved at all than never to have loved, so to speak. But now we don't even have a memory that they ever even existed at all. Right. And that, I find, probably the scariest aspect of this.
So I guess then the other thing that I'm wondering if you've uncovered in your research is, Have you found any inconsistencies in the historical records for any of this kind of stuff?
Well, besides the maps, which clearly show things as being different, for instance, on maps of the world, it shows Australia sitting much further south, and now it's sitting almost in sight of New Guinea. And I lived in Australia as a kid, and tell me, there was no way anyone could tell me that we were close to anywhere else. I always felt extremely isolated in Australia. Couldn't wait to come back to America for that reason. I liked Australia, but it just seemed so far from anywhere, is what I used to say. Now there's this narrow little strait between it and New Guinea, and New Guinea had been discovered long, long before Australia had been found, and yet how could they have missed Australia if this narrow little strait was all that was between New Guinea and Australia? New Zealand seems to have shifted. It's much further south towards Antarctica, but it used to be more or less parallel horizontally with Australia. Mongolia was once a lot bigger. Now in maps it shows it's quite small. Islands have been disappearing all over the place. Sandy Hook Island just disappeared a couple of years ago in the South Pacific, not far from Australia. High Brazil was on maps for almost 400 years. It's disappeared. The number of islands that have disappeared is incredible. I don't know why it's so many islands, but islands seem to be a big part of it. And other things are changing too. Various medallions and all sorts of things. And it bothers me because I used to think reality was so solid, so fixed, that as bad or as good as it was, this was it. But now I'm not sure from day to day if I'm even in the same reality. And who might have blinked out that I don't even remember ever existed?
Right. So
did I have it once that I now no longer remember having? It's a scary feeling.
So when you went back, have you looked at some of the old maps back from the 40s, 50s, and has there been any that have depicted these land masses going back and looking at any of these old maps, or are they all now just vanished?
Yes, the old maps, for instance, one of High Brazil, an island supposedly that was to the southwest of Ireland, and it had literally been shown on maps. So you can look at some of the maps from the 17th and 16th and even 18th century show High Brazil, and then now it's just gone, as if it never was. There was an island to the west of the Azores, I believe it was, where when the Islam Empire invaded southern Spain, many Catholic bishops there and their followers went to this island. Well, now this island was put on maps for a long time. It clearly depicted. Now it doesn't exist, and they say it never did. Well, why was it on those maps? Granted, the older maps were often inaccurate. Granted, they often had flaws and problems with them. But some of these islands on these maps existed for centuries. High Brazil is one of them. And just to throw in an oddity, maybe Atlantis is another. I'm just tossing that in there, but it seems to be like we keep losing land masses and they keep shifting on us. But Sandy Hook was at the South Pacific, approximately 17 miles long, about 5 miles wide. There's even a depiction of it on a Google Earth map, which is a satellite photo. They have pixelated it out. It's in black. You can see the shape and the width of the island quite clearly. And normally Google would black these out, pixelate them if they were government bases or something at the government's request.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, now Sandy Hook doesn't exist at all. That's when Australian research ship went right over the island to where it was, and they measured the ocean. It's like 4,000 feet deep. So it wasn't like it sunk beneath the waves. It's gone.
Right. And that was going to be my next question is, any chance it just kind of, moved under the ocean? But yeah, that kind of dispels that right away, that argument. Holy cow. Well, Rob, I think what we're going to do here, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. All right, so we're back with Rob Shelsky. We are talking about the Mandela Effect, and don't go away. The conversation is really getting interesting. Wow, Rob, this is some mind-blowing stuff. As I said before, we're talking about land masses that have kind of just, disappeared off maps and that sort of thing, and seemed like they never existed, although we have memory of them. Fascinating stuff. Can you talk a little bit more about the actual physical evidence? You touched on a couple of things about the actual physical evidence that you've uncovered for this Mandela Effect.
Well, for instance, the Mandela Effect isn't just about maps and missing islands and countries changing shape or positions, which is pretty much physical evidence. I mean, when you find globes from the 60s, 70s, and 90s that show changes or places that are no longer there, that's physical evidence. I mean, anyone can go to the movie Dazed and Confused, watch it, freeze frame it on that particular spot, and they'll see the landmass on the globe for themselves. So that's pretty good physical evidence, visual. But we also found that coin in Mexico. We have found that Swiss watch in China. But also, it seems to be affecting, of all things, the Bible as well. Now, I don't know if it's affecting other religious texts, such as the Quran, but it does seem to be affecting the Bible in a number of ways. And it seems to have a lot of ministers very upset. They think some of them think it's the work of Satan. Now, I don't, but I don't rule anything out, because, I mean, when this is going on, who knows what the cause is, but the changes in the Bible are quite noticeable and seem to be quite real. Also, changes in the human body. We seem to have undergone a lot of sudden changes in the human body. Just as one quick example, physical example, you can watch a lot of old TV shows, movies, whatever, where there's a nurse taking someone's pulse. They have their hand wrapped around their wrist, fingers on one edge, and the thumb right in the middle of the underside of the wrist to test for the pulse. Just out of curiosity, have you ever seen that?
I don't believe I have.
You haven't actually seen something like that, or
no, I don't. I don't believe I have.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, in a lot of old shows, Dr. Kildare, Marcus Welby, MD, that's what they're doing when they take the pulse. And now, when you take the pulse, the thumb has to go over to the far left edge of the wrist, because that's where the artery is moved to. So you're no longer pressing your thumb on the middle of the underside of the wrist to get the pulse. You have to move it way over to the edge. Now, oddly, having the artery there is a good thing, because it's more protected by the bone structure and less likely to be severed that way. And this sort of thing goes on and on. There's an awful lot of information about the human body having changed. If you'd like another example, your mouth has slightly more space for teeth than it used to have, so people don't have the same problem with wisdom teeth as they used to. Some people still do, but it's far, far less than it used to be. It used to be people always had to have wisdom teeth pulled because there just wasn't space for them. The chin seems to have become slightly stronger and more square. The cervical vertebrae in your neck are almost twice as broad now and much more solid, making it more difficult to have whiplash. The collarbone in the front has come up higher, so it feels a bit like you're wearing a turtleneck sweater. It also has lost its slight curve and comes out as a much straighter line. The ribs, you now have, you used to have free-floating ribs. I don't know if you've ever seen skeletons from Halloween, but you can see the rib cage on the skeleton. The top ribs are connected to the sternum, but the lower ribs just wrap around but don't touch. They just hang there, sort of.
Right.
Not anymore. They're all attached to the sternum, which actually protects your interior organs better. But we actually have pictures of skeletons from cartoons and things from Halloween that show the bottom ribs being free-floating. And this sort of thing just goes on and on and on. All sorts of changes have taken place in the human body, apparently. The skull. Old images of the skull used to show hollow eye sockets. Now, if you look at a skull, it has a back interior bone, curved, and that protects the brain. But if you look at old pictures of the skull, it's just a blank black eye socket. There's no backbone. The nose, there used to be, on the skull, it was just a hollow gap in the skull. Now there's a thin bone running vertically down the center of that gap. So now there's a bone in our nose where there never used to be. So apparently. But, and you can call up pictures on the internet yourself to find these things. In the Bible, things seem to be changing rampantly, and no one seems to know why. Again, I don't know if this has anything to do with the Quran or other religious texts, because I've only checked the King James Version, but the changes in the King James Version seem to be very real, so real that you can look these things up for yourself. One of the most famous is, and the lion shall lie down with the lamb. You type in lion will lie down with the lamb images on the internet, and you will come up with thousands of images of a lion lying beside a lamb. Not anymore. Now the Bible says it's the wolf shall lie down with the lamb. And I don't believe I ever saw it was brought up to see an image of a wolf and a lamb together.
Yeah.
It was always the lion and the lamb. In fact, it's a famous saying, the lion and the lamb. So where does this come from? What's happening?
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Can you talk, because you tie in some other theories into the Mandela effect, and one of them is quantum physics, and can you talk a little bit about how quantum physics relate to this concept of the Mandela effect?
Sure. Quantum physics seems to enter strongly into this whole thing as a possible explanation. One of the explanations is that quantum physics seems to require parallel realities. Every time a choice is made, say an atom splits or doesn't split, another reality branches off from that point. And it's identical to ours, except there the atom split, whereas in ours maybe it didn't. Or you chose to step onto a bus, and another one you chose at the last minute not to. And so if quantum physics requires all these realities, there's a real concern that by messing with this, that we are maybe causing problems, and the Mandela effect is the side effect. Quantum computers could be one of the things that's causing this, because as the founder of D-Wave, one of the two founders of D-Wave themselves said, and you can look this up on the internet, his seminar is posted there on YouTube, and he says flat out that their quantum computers access quantum computers in parallel realities to quickly solve problems. So he's actually saying that our parallel realities and his quantum computers, D-Wave quantum computers, are accessing those realities to quickly solve problems and the computers in them. Now, what are the side effects of that? We don't know. It's like when we blew up the first atomic bomb. Some scientists said there was a small chance we could ignite the atmosphere and burn off the entire atmosphere of the world with just one explosion of an atomic bomb. Well, we went ahead and did it, and it didn't happen. But there were other side effects we didn't realize would be so terrible. We didn't realize that fallout would occur to such an extent and last as long as it does, sometimes hundreds of years in some cases. So that could be one of the causes. Another group say it's CERN, that by smashing the atoms at CERN in Switzerland at the super collider there, that some of the side effects are the Mandela effect. Another theory is that it might actually be a different theory of reality. Well, actually, there's two of them. There is the simulation theory, which says that it's basically the Matrix idea, and we are running a reality on the computer, and every now and then there are going to be glitches, or some programmer out there in the universe, not our universe, is making changes and alterations, and what we're witnessing is the Mandela effect as a result. He makes a change in one part of the program, and it causes a glitch in another part of the program. This happens a lot with programmers. They fix one problem only to create others, and they're not even aware until someone reports them. So it could be that. And then there's another basic theory of the universe called emergence theory, E8 theory, that also predicts there could be retrocausality. Because in quantum physics, you can change, you can perform the split screen experiment, to keep it simple, and if you go back and then change the way you set it up, you change the results. It's as if it's backtracking in time, saying, oh, you changed the initial conditions of the experiment, so now I have to behave this way instead. It's called retrocausality. If retrocausality exists, then maybe the Mandela effect is retrocausality. Someone is changing something in time in the past and runs forward into the future and causes us to have so-called false memories.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. So, kind of goes also to the idea of time travel. So, I imagine this has to come into play in one of the theories too. I'm guessing that quantum physics probably allows for the possibility of time travel. And, is it possible that way into the future there's time travelers going back? And, some of these seem like minute changes. Some of them seem a little bit bigger that you touched on, but does that come into play here possibly too?
Well, Stephen Hawking once said, if there is time travel, why don't we see them? Where are all these silver-suited tourists with their silver glasses walking around with their silver cameras snapping pictures of us here in the past? Well, another famous person, well, not so famous, but his quotation was, if there are time travels, they will walk very quietly and speak in hushed voices because they could change anything, including themselves in the future. So, yes, we could have time travelers, and we seem to have a lot of evidence for that. We have what's called oop art. That's what archaeologists call it. It's objects that we keep finding, like that Swiss watch in that tomb in China, in places where they shouldn't be. There's thousands of them. And the thing is, archaeologists will say, well, these are hoaxes, or they're a mistake, or it's just an anomaly. And that's one of their favorite things. Oh, it's an anomaly. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just, which really doesn't solve the issue at all. I mean, naming something doesn't tell you what it really is. We have found a skeleton of a young woman in Central America on one of the islands there, encased in rock that was dated back some 28 million years. Human beings weren't around anywhere near that long, according to everything we know, or think we know. We have found blocks of aluminum, refined in digs. One was in Germany, and apparently, I think it was Germany, and apparently this was an oop-art too, because at that time where they dug it up from it, that layer, it shouldn't have existed because no one had refined aluminum. It takes very high temperatures to refine aluminum, and aluminum wasn't discovered as an element till much, much later. So what are we doing with that? In the Caucasus, in the Ural Mountains, they have found literally thousands of nano screws and tiny screws, some a fraction of a centimeter long, and these are different alloys, and we call them screws because they sort of look like a screw. And these things have titanium in them, and other alloys. Now, titanium, we haven't been able to use until very recently in our history, because again, it takes an extremely high temperature to refine it, and it's a fairly rare element. So who in the heck was doing this? And they're saying that these could date back as far as, say, 26,000 years. Well, who was making nano screws 26,000 years ago?
Right.
Was it someone from the future into the past? We have found kettles encased in stone. We have found ladles and vases, metal vases encased inside of coal that were at depths that made them millions, as much as, in some cases, 300 million years old. Nobody is supposed to have been alive at that time that was even remotely human. We're talking back in some cases before the dinosaurs. So who is using a ladle or one was a handbell? Who is using these things so far back in different periods of time? So do we have evidence for time travel? Well, it's either time travel or it's aliens or it's both, because where did these things come from? And by the way, you can see them for yourself. Some are on display in the Smithsonian.
Wow. Again, this stuff is just, it really blows your mind. It really does. And it certainly makes sense that scientists and physicists and others are going to, especially if it challenges their assertions or their theories, whether you want to say, theories on evolution, whatnot. It is, I guess you could understand how they would want to dismiss it, especially if it doesn't fit within their theories and their hypothesis.
And we've had case after case of that in history. Everyone now accepts continental drift, tectonic plates with the oceans and continents on them, drifting around and banging into each other and causing earthquakes and volcanoes. As run of the mill. Oh yes, of course, there's continental drift. Well, in the 1920s, a man by the name, I think it was Alfred Wegener, came up with the idea of continental drift. Well, the other geologists at the time absolutely laughed at him. Continents drifting around on plates on the surface of the earth, like islands floating on the ocean or something. It can't be done. And they ridiculed him to the point where his career was ruined. He died a broken man. And then along came the 1950s, and suddenly continental drift raised its head again, and this time it was accepted. So we have a long history in science. We think of science as being totally objective and unbiased. Wrong. Those that are in the power, those that have an axe to grind, those who have purported that something is this way have a lot to lose if it's something found out it's totally different, and it makes them look like fools. So there's a strong vested interest in not changing the status quo.
Right, and the biggest example I can think of is, and I believe it was Galileo who tried to prove that all of the planets in our solar system were in elliptical orbit around the sun, and there was always this belief that the Earth was the center of the solar system, the universe, and to challenge that notion, and was ultimately jailed over it. So yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, like you said, in history where this has happened.
Yes, he was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life for daring to say it. And even at his trial, he was forced to recant or face a burning stake. So he did, so to avoid that fate. But he was heard to have whispered, "And still it moves." In other words, the Earth moves around the sun, which is a great line, "and still it moves." He didn't dare shout it, but he whispered it because he was that convinced. But there are other weird examples, too. For instance, when we think of Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, famous painting, we see Christ holding up the chalice and he's blessing his apostles, right?
Right.
Well, there's no chalice in that picture. We all remember him having the chalice, but there's no chalice in that picture. So
Wow.
He is not holding up a chalice. It's not there. And yet everyone remembers him clearly sitting in the center, equal number of apostles on each side of him, and in front of him is the chalice. And he's blessing the chalice before he passes the wine around. It's not there. So, again, this goes on and on and on. And how do we account for this?
Right. So the other thing that is fascinating when you start to think about this stuff is when you start to apply it to the paranormal. So, we think we're, when I say we, I'm speaking generally. I'm a paranormal investigator. I've been doing it for a number of years. And, is it possible that, when we experience what we think is a spirit or ghost, is it possible that we are just experiencing bleed over? So you already mentioned the concept of parallel universes. You touched on it a little bit in quantum physics. Is it possible that there's some bleed over here, and we may be, experiencing somebody who's maybe in another parallel dimension or universe, and that's what we really are experiencing, rather than ghosts or dead people?
I think that could very well be true, because, we're looking for evidence for the Mandela effect. And what I like to do is try to tie the different interests together to see if there's any kind of overall umbrella that would suit it. And yes, if you see a ghost or someone with see-through, and it could very well be that you're catching a glimpse of someone in a parallel timeline that's very close to ours. There's the phenomenon of the shadow people, so-called shadow people. Are these really shadow people, or are we just catching faint, quick glimpses of people in a parallel time zone occupying our house in a parallel universe right next to ours, so close that it's as close to you as your skin is to your clothing, but we can't feel it or see it normally unless it's glitches. And yeah, it could very well be that could explain the whole ghost thing very much. Also, there's other kind of glitches, too, with regard to parallel universes. In fact, many think the Mandela effect is the fact that somehow our timelines are crossing and interacting just that way. And their only concern is, if that's so, what's causing it? And again, then we go back to the idea of quantum computers, or the CERN super collider, or the fact that we're living in a matrix, and these are glitches. And of course, if we're living in a matrix, most scientists think that if that's the truest theory, then there could be countless such matrices all running at the same time in parallel on the same computer. And what we're doing is sort of blurring every once in a while, getting a glitch from the other side, so to speak, or another side. And that's scary, too. And by the way, several physicists think there's about a 35% probability that we are living in a simulation.
So you talked about the CERN Large Hadron Collider. And isn't it true that after they turned this thing on, the Mandela effect is kind of a new phenomenon, but didn't this really come about after that event happened, after they actually turned on this Large Hadron Collider?
There was what we think might have been a time travel event. Some man was found on the property at the Hadron Collider, and he was arrested. He was taken into custody, I believe it was by the Swiss authorities. And he stated that he was from the future and had been sent back to delay the turning on of the Large Hadron Collider because it wasn't supposed to be turned on yet, and so it was his job to delay it to a later date. And they, thinking he was nuts, they had him put in an asylum until they could, decide what they had to do with him, take him to court or whatever. Well, he disappeared from the asylum. And the weird thing about it is that no one's ever heard of him. His name never came up. His fingerprints never led to any concrete person. It was as if he was a total non-person. But the fact of his arrest is quite real. It's a matter of record.
Wow. Unbelievable. So, is it possible, though, that, isn't that one of the big theories here, that this, the CERN Hadron Collider may have caused this kind of Mandela effect?
Yes, it is, but I find personally myself that one the weakest of the several possible explanations, because space is full of cosmic rays, cosmic particles bombarding the Earth and interacting with our atmosphere. The universe is basically a super collider. We're getting highly energetic particles, so-called cosmic rays, bombarding the Earth every instant. And if that would cause a problem, why aren't we having a problem from that? So the CERN is just sort of replicating that. So why would the CERN do something that nature is already doing and doesn't seem to be having any side effects from? So that one to me is probably the weakest of the I would say the main three: simulation, time travel, or the CERN. I personally think it might be quantum computers. If you're accessing parallel timelines to do your computational values, as one of the co-founders of D-Wave said, then what are the side effects? Are we blurring the timelines? Are we mixing and matching? Are we messing with things we shouldn't be messing with? There very well could be unknown side effects. We've never done this before.
Right. Fascinating. So the other thing that comes to mind here when we're talking about this concept of the Mandela effect is the UFO phenomena. So there's a lot of researchers out there that now are bringing in alternative theories on what could be going on. They're just, the possibilities out there are more than just we're being visited by extraterrestrials from other, other, I almost said universe, I meant to say galaxies. Is it possible that, UFOs may be coming from other dimensions, other parallel...
Oh, absolutely. For one thing, UFOs quite often seem to violate the laws of physics as we know them. They don't just violate them, they violate them. They violate the laws of inertia and what constitutes solid and reality for us, all sorts of things. They violate the speed of light, apparently, and many other things. So sure, the UFOs could be from the far future. They could be aliens from the far future. They might be someone from the far past. After all, it doesn't matter when you invent a time machine, all time is open to you. If an alien race, for instance, 2 billion years ago invented the time machine, then they can move forward in time to our time, and we could be getting visits from the far, far past or the far, far future, or from our own descendants coming back to the past, or from other dimensions, or from parallel timelines. Whoever has the capability of bending the rules of physics to the point where they're breaking obviously has capabilities way beyond us.
Yes, absolutely. And, that's... It just, the possibilities here just almost seem limitless when you start to think about this and UFOs. And the other thing that comes to mind here is, I don't know if you've followed Jeremy Corbell's movie that he just put out recently about Skinwalker Ranch and some of the things that have been going on there. Have you followed that by any chance?
Yes, I've actually didn't see the movie. In fact, I'm planning to see it. But I have heard quite a bit about Skinwalker Ranch and some of the really strange stuff going on there. The universe, or at least our world, seems to be full of the most bizarre oddities. And obviously we haven't gotten near getting all the answers yet. So, but it doesn't matter. Well, I guess it does matter who might be causing the Mandela effect. For me, the Mandela effect is real. The evidence is all around us, it seems like, and not just false memories. I mean, Ford had a medallion struck for an exposition, and it had the little curlicue on the crosshatch of the F. But someone showed and took a photo of their coin and showed it and said, I have one that doesn't have that. And Ford says, no, we've always had that on there since we first got the logo back in, I think it was 1912. That was the year the Titanic sank. And yet, since then, people have found cars in junkyards that have the one emblem on the front with the little curly Q on the crosshatch of the F in Ford, but on the back of it they have the old version that doesn't have it. I say old version. Ford says they never had that version. They only had the one with the curly Q. So these are physical pieces of evidence, and the corporations themselves are saying, no, we never had that. There's nothing. We never struck two coins for the exposition, only the one. And it was with the curly Q. And yet here's a man who has the coin that doesn't have the curly Q. There are cars, you can go to the junkyard and see for yourself, that don't have the curly Q. These are solid physical pieces of evidence. The CIA has records in their historical records, in their archives. Some are available under the Freedom of Information Act. And some of those documents give two completely historical versions of the same event at opposite ends to each other. Now, how is that possible that the CIA, in its own archives, could have documents that say the event unfolded this way, and then there's another document that completely contradicts that version of events? What's going on? Whatever it is, it's scary because we have no control over it, apparently.
Right, and that's I'm glad you brought that case, that point up, because I mentioned the historical record there, and there's just another example of how, there's two different versions in the historical record there that, how how do you even begin to explain that? I mean, that's just...
Exactly. And now, skeptics could say, this was a hoax, that's an anomaly, that never happened, and they go on and on and on and on. But when you start compiling all this evidence together and you find out there's really thousands and thousands of such incidents and pieces of evidence, the end result is it seems to be overwhelming that the Mandela effect does exist. I mean, there are even people who said they have crossed over into dimensions. And there are people who have witnessed them going. A movie that just came out called The Vanished, which actually I thought was not very good, was about three men on, I believe it was Flanagan Island off the coast of Scotland, right around 1900. They vanished from the island. And after extensive researches, investigations, and court proceedings, they simply cannot understand what happened to those men. They've come up with different theories and scenarios, but all of them fall short of the mark. Here are the three men in the lighthouse. They suddenly disappear. When the relief crew get there, all they find is an empty lighthouse with one overturned chair. But the door to the lighthouse is locked. The outer gate to the outer wall of the lighthouse is locked. Two foul weather are missing, but one is still there. But no men, nothing, never seen or heard from again. Just vanished. A man was bragging that he could run really fast. His friends didn't believe him. They had a bet. There was a race. This was in England, and it wasn't recent. We're talking like over almost 2 centuries ago, and because they didn't trust him, they decided to follow right behind him in a horse and cart. His several friends who had the bet. They were right behind him. He's running down the dirt road right ahead of him. He trips and falls forward right in the middle of the road, and he never hits the ground. He just vanishes, never to be seen or heard from again. Left behind family and friends and property, and no one knows how or why this could happen. And these aren't isolated incidents. There's one in Utah that took place, and some college girls back, I think it was in the 60s or maybe late 50s. There's so many incidents, it's hard to remember them all in clarity, but they went on a trip and they had to get back before the college locked them out, and they'd be in big trouble because they're in the dorms there. And on the way back there, the road suddenly changed. It went from tarmac to concrete, and it ended abruptly after miles and miles at the base of a cliff. They figured they'd made a wrong turn, so they backtracked. They noticed the country looked completely different. So they're driving down the highway, and then they saw a tavern, so they pulled into it. And the one girl said, look, let's ask these people where they are. They saw some men standing off in the distance. By this point, it was dark, it was late. And the one girl called out to them. One of the men, so-called, turned around. She screamed and yelled at the driver, get us out of here, get us out of here, get us out of here now. The driver took off. They were racing down the road, and this egg-shaped sort of car followed behind them for a ways, and then suddenly it disappeared. It was shortly after that that they realized the road had turned back into tarmac and the surroundings looked familiar again. And then the driver asked the passenger, why were you screaming like that? What were you so afraid of? And she said, they weren't human. And by the way, that highway, and I can't think of the number of it because, again, I don't have that information right in front of me to my book, had long been known as a haunted highway. Now, was it really haunted, or was it that it was a weak spot in reality and people could shift back and forth into parallel timelines? Had she shifted into the future? Had she shifted into a timeline where humans weren't human? I mean, we don't know, but this goes on and on and on. A very recent one is Lorena Garcia. It's been all over the internet, for one thing. She woke up in the morning. She noticed certain things were different, like the color of her bedspread. Not major things, minor things. She kind of dismissed it, got up, went to work. She found out that the department she went to, the people there knew of her but didn't know her, and they said, you don't work here, you work over on the other side of the building. And she went over there, confused, and everyone there recognized her like she was an old friend, but she didn't know them, or except maybe by sight at a distance. Scared, she left, of course, and she talked to her sister, and she was saying what was happening, and in the course of the conversation, it came up, she mentioned her sister's shoulder operation. Her sister said, I haven't had one. And she said, do you have a scar right there on your shoulder? And the girl pulls down the top of her blouse and says, there's no scar there. And there wasn't. And then she found out that she wasn't with the boyfriend she thought she was. She was with an ex-boyfriend that she remembered breaking up with 7 months before. And her newer boyfriend she could find no sign of, or his son. It was as if they never existed. She went to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said, you are not insane, other than these weird hallucinations perhaps, but other than that you seem perfectly normal. So then in desperation she hired a private investigator, and he could find no sign of her current boyfriend or his son or any of it. So in desperation she went online on the internet and she says, if anyone knows anything about any of this, please contact me. And she's not the only one. There are hundreds of these cases. So if you want the proof, it seems to be all over the place.
Right, and going back to, and I got to go back to the Skinwalker Ranch case because, I mean, you're talking scientists and professional researchers and, former people who work for former government think tanks involved in, doing research there with Robert Bigelow and his firm for many years. And there's just such bizarre things that have went on there that all seem to kind of play into this kind of idea that you're talking about. Perhaps this is a certain area that there's just some sort of, some people want to call them paranormal vortexes, or where there's just there's.
Well, I used to be a MUFON field investigator, and about a year and a half ago, I resigned because I didn't like the way that the MUFON had changed hands. It was under control, and the rumors were that all the information, the data that we were collecting was going to Bigelow, and wasn't, for what purpose we don't know. Now, that's just a rumor. I don't know that it's fact, but I had spoken with my state director of MUFON, and she, too, resigned for the same reason. So something had changed with MUFON, and it was no longer the independent organization it used to be, or at least we felt it wasn't that way. So things are changing, and weird things are going on in association with Bigelow and Skinwalker.
Yeah, so not only that area, but another area that comes to mind, I had I had the paranormal researcher Stan Gordon on the show a while back talking about Chestnut Ridge in Pennsylvania. And, it kind of harkens back to similar things that are going on at Skinwalker and just things that, kind of play into to the kind of the theories that you're talking about. I mean, there are multiple things going on, but it's not only UFO sightings, but UFO sightings in conjunction with people seeing Bigfoot-type creatures and other cryptids and just some of the most bizarre stuff you can think of going on here. And initially people are going to say, wow, there's crazy stuff, but, are these people all crazy? It's being reported across multiple counties, similar timelines, and how is all this stuff going on? It really is just mind-blowing.
Well, what is that line from Shakespeare Macbeth? By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes. Something does definitely seem to be going on. Is it all interconnected or not? I'm not sure. It could very well be. UFO with aliens? Very well could be, but it also could be UFO with beings from another dimension or another timeline that just don't look human to us. They're a variation on the human form. They evolve differently in their timeline. I'm not sure what's going on there, and I'm not sure if we're in collusion with them or not. A lot of conspiracy theories going on, and it's awfully hard to pin down the truth, especially when there's also a number of hoaxes going on, too. And so you have to be so careful to avoid not taking everything at face value. And having a science degree, I really rather push the idea that I want hard evidence. Is there hard evidence for the Mandela Effect? Yes, I absolutely think so. Is there hard evidence for UFOs? Yes, absolutely, I think there is. Where are they from? I'm not at all sure. But they could just as easily be from another dimension or timeline or from the future or the far past, as they could be from another solar system. It would take about the same level of physics to accomplish coming from another stellar system at faster than the speed of light as it would to travel through time, probably. So either option is open. And the more you dig into this, the only word I can think of is creepy it gets. My brother claims missing time. When he was 16 years old, he and a friend had missing time while they were camping in the desert. He swears that he did. He does not claim to be abducted. He has no memory of abduction, so he doesn't claim it. They saw a bright light in the sky. It was late at night. They decided to go out and see where it came down because it looked like it wasn't far away, a bright red light. They got up. They started to leave the camp, and the next thing they both remember is getting up in the morning at about 9:30, striking camp and waiting for his friend's father to pick them up. And and they can't account for the entire night. So is something weird going on? Absolutely. But my brother, I asked him, I said, Mike, if you're on your deathbed, and I said, if you wanted to know the answer, because all those years he was researching it, he lived in Vegas near Area 51. After that point, he wanted to find out what was going on. His friend moved his entire family from San Diego to Vegas to be near him, to help him with the investigations, because they both couldn't account for what had happened to them. And so I asked my brother, I said, having spent all that time looking, what would you like to know the answer? If you're on your deathbed, would you like to have the answer or not? And he said, it depends. And I said, on what, Mike? He said, on whether it was good news or bad news.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the scary part, if you think about it. I mean, if it's good news, great. If it's actually Santa Claus saying all this, hey, that's great. If it's some inimical force or dark enemy, not so cool.
And that's funny you mentioned that, because I had Larry Holcomb on the show, and he wrote the book UFOs or Presidents and UFOs, and that's one of the things he talked about as far as getting to the bottom of the UFO mystery. Maybe it's something, if you really do know the answer to, you may not like the answer. So that kind of reminded me of it.
At all? No, I wrote a book. Deadly UFOs and the Disappeared, and the things that have happened to people who have just vanished when there have been UFO sightings, never to turn up again while others do, is incredible. The amount of damage done to people and their lives because of the UFO phenomenon is incredible. I mean, there are many more deaths than people realize associated with UFO sightings. There are injuries, lots of them related to UFO sightings. There are the vanished, the people have disappeared, never to return. Never mind the abducted. Check out David Paulides' books, The Missing 411. That's pretty scary stuff. And we have a lot of that whenever there's UFO sightings, it seems. In fact, the number of people who disappear each year on the Earth is incredible. Absolutely incredible. They just vanish. Not accounted for by murderers or wanting to disappear or being kidnapped or abducted. Besides those, literally tens of thousands of people vanish every year. Some 50,000 in America alone every year. Australia, 25 to 30,000 every year just vanish. No trace ever seen of them again. Where are they all disappearing to? So yeah, the answer may not be a pleasant one.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned David Paulides. The research he's done into missing person cases is just, that's another thing that's frightening, fascinating yet frightening. And again, it just seems like all of this kind of ties in. I mean, all of this weird phenomena that we're talking about here, this is why, to me, the paranormal is just so fascinating. And, depending on how you look at all this stuff, but if you're looking at it from the possibilities we're talking about here, it's just limitless. going back to the UFO issue, I'm kind of thinking, and I've heard recent researchers say maybe it's all of the above. Maybe there are extraterrestrials that, hey, if we think from what we know about physics, we think, well, there's no way they could get here. But we're talking about civilizations that may be millions, if not billions of years ahead of us. And so that's a possibility.
And it could be more than one, and it could be more than one cause.
Right.
It could be quantum computers causing the Mandela effect. It could be extraterrestrials and some of the UFOs. Some of them might be coming from another dimension. There's no law that says it can't be more than one cause, which makes it so confusing because for decades we thought, oh, yeah, they must be aliens, and that kept it pretty simple. But now as we've learned more, we realize that there could be lots of different answers to the question, and it may be just one overall answer that explains all of it, or it could be multiple answers. The universe, we've learned, is not the simple place we once thought it was. It's pretty complex.
Right, and isn't it true that scientists are now saying they believe there's at least 10 or 11 parallel universes? I seem to remember reading something about that a couple of times, or seeing something.
Right, the string theory requires, it depends on which version of the string theory you go by, but anywhere from 9 to 11, I think it is, other dimensions or other universes, if you will. But there's also the inflation theory. The Big Bang theory of the universe requires a multitude of universes. I mean, a number to a power that's incomprehensible to the human mind. But also, even the standard theory of our universe is if it's this is a very simple one. If our universe is infinite, which about half of the scientists think it is, because the evidence seems to be showing it must be, then it goes on forever. Obviously, it's infinite. But there's only so many ways that you can put particles and subatomic particles together. It's like having Lego blocks. You can build lots of different things with those Lego blocks, but eventually you run out of different things and you start repeating yourself. Well, if the universe is infinite and when it has the same types of particles throughout, well, they can construct planets and suns and all sorts of variations and things, asteroids, whatever. But eventually it runs out. Even though that number is astronomically high, it will run out and has to start repeating itself. So if the universe is infinite, there must be an infinite number of areas of the universe that are identical to ours or almost just like it. Parallel universes, if you will. Wow. Areas of the universe where the Earth and the Sun came into being and the galaxies look all just like ours, but with slight variations and differences, where you might be a billionaire instead of a poor person. You might be dead instead of alive. So this would repeat endlessly in every variation possible. Just as when you're playing with Lego blocks, there's just so many ways you can build things, and then you start building the same thing over and over and over.
Wow. And again, this stuff gets so deep, it just can really, really boggle the mind.
I was going to say, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, to say the least. Hey, Rob, this has been a fascinating discussion, and for those listening, please check out the book. So the book is Shattered Reality, The Mandela Effect. And, as I said before, Rob, I really kind of dismissed this Mandela Effect as just like a lot of others have. This is just false memory. But, just recently reading about it and kind of hearing interviews you've done in the past, it really has just opened my mind and my horizons on the possibilities here. It's just fascinating stuff. And, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with me. And I'd definitely love to have you on the show again sometime down the road to talk again. Where can people find information about your work? Not only the book I just mentioned, the recent book, but some of the other work you do.
Well, like you, I'm a paranormal researcher, so I've written quite a few books. They can all be found on Amazon Kindle. Just type in my name, Shelsky, Shellsky, and they'll all come up for you. And I think that's the best place to go to find my stuff.
Great. And did you actually have a website as well? Is that correct? And can you tell us what that is?
It's called robshelsky.blogspot.com. It's real simple to remember. And you can go there, and I keep it fairly updated, and it tells when I'm writing, what's about to come out, and where to go find it. It also gives links to various books that I have, so you can go directly if you want to purchase them. And sometimes I include some news information that I come across. So, again, being a researcher, I like to share.
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate that. Appreciate all the research you've done on this. This is amazing, topic of discussion. Again, you could go on for hours with this stuff. And again,
well, it's what we need to do. I mean, I appreciate you being a paranormal researcher too. The more of us who research this, the more likely we are to find some answers. And I don't know about you, but I want answers.
Absolutely, and I think most of us do. Again, make sure for the listeners you check out that book. Amazing discussion. I know I am. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm certainly going to check that out. And once again, Rob, thank you so much for joining me. It was great having you on the show. And again, I hope we can have you on down the road again and talk some more about this stuff.
Well, I appreciate it very much, and thank you, sir.
All right, Rob, you have a great day.
Okay, so that's going to about do it for tonight's show. And I really think that interview made my head hurt, but it is an intriguing topic. And it's also a little bit scary to think that things from our past may be getting changed. And wow, what about some of those other concepts, quantum computing, retrocausality, all these kind of topics that would kind of blow your mind. But what a truly intriguing, fascinating topic and discussion that was. And make sure you don't miss the next show when I will have Dr. Lynn Kitai joining me. And Dr. Lynn is the author of the book The Phoenix Lights, A Skeptic's Discovery That We Are Not Alone. And she's also the award-winning executive producer of the Phoenix Lights documentary. And so I'm so thrilled to have her joining me on the show. And don't miss that show. It's going to be an amazing one. And it's going to be coming right on the heels of the 22nd anniversary of what I consider to be probably one of the most compelling UFO cases in all of the United States. Of all the different cases that have happened, Roswell, Rendlesham, the Chicago O'Hara incident, and many, many more. I think this is right up there with them. So many different credible witnesses in that case. So don't miss that show. Again, don't forget to visit the website at passion4theparanormal.com and make sure you check that out. And thank you so much for tuning into the show. And I'm really looking forward to the next episode. Have a great night.